Have you ever stopped to think, how in the world do you take an entire country's economy, I mean, all the buying, all the selling, all the making of stuff, and just boil it all down to one single number? Well, let's get into it because today we're demystifying the most famous economic scorecard there is, GDP.
You hear it on the news all the time, right? How's the economy doing? Sometimes the answer feels pretty obvious. If a ton of people are out of work, yeah, things are probably not great. If new businesses are popping up everywhere, things are looking good. But a lot of the time, it's way more complicated. How do we get a clear, objective answer to that question?
Well, this need for a real answer, a hard number, became an absolute emergency back in the Great Depression. Leaders like President Franklin D. Roosevelt knew things were bad, I mean, really bad, but they had no reliable way to measure just how bad. They couldn't even tell if their policies were working because they had no consistent yardstick for the economy. So out of this crisis came a huge breakthrough. An economist named Simon Kuznets stepped up and developed a system to actually track what an entire nation is producing. And that system, well, that's what we now know as gross domestic product, or GDP. It's the economy's official scorecard.
All right, so what exactly is it? GDP is the total dollar value of all final goods and services produced inside a country's borders over a certain period, usually a year. Now, that word final is absolutely the key to getting this right. In 2020, the U.S. GDP was a mind-blowing $20.9 trillion. Yeah, trillion with a T. But getting to a number that massive without making a classic mistake is tricky.
And that big mistake is called double counting. Let's make this simple. Imagine a factory makes $100 worth of tires. Then, a truck company buys those tires and uses them to build a truck that it sells for $30,000. Now, if you counted both the tires and the truck, you'd be counting the value of those tires twice, right? Their cost is already baked into the truck's final price. So GDP avoids this by only counting the value of the final product, in this case, the $30,000 truck. Okay, so we're only counting the final stuff. We get it. That $20.9 trillion figure represents all the final things bought and sold. But who's doing all the buying? Well, economists break it down to give us a much clearer picture of what's really driving the economic engine. And get this, a whopping 2/3 of the entire U.S. economy is driven by people like you and me, just regular consumer spending. That's huge. The rest is made up of government spending and business investment, like building new factories. And that little negative slice for net exports, that just means the U.S. bought more stuff from other countries than it sold to them in 2020. This brings us to a really neat core idea in economics. Every single transaction has a buyer and a seller. So we can measure GDP by adding up everything we buy. That's the demand side we just saw. Or we can add up the value of everything we make, goods, services, buildings, you name it. And here's the cool part. Either way you slice it, you get the exact same number. It's just two sides of the very same economic coin. Okay, this all seems pretty straightforward, right? But the moment we try to compare GDP over time, we hit a major snag. It's this illusion created by something we are all very familiar with, inflation. So check this out. Back in 1960, the U.S. nominal GDP, that's just the raw number measured in the prices of that year, was about $543 billion. Fast forward to 2020, and it's nearly $21 trillion. That is a 38 times increase, an absolute explosion. 38 times! I mean, that sounds incredible, right? But does that really mean the U.S. was producing 38 times more stuff, that we were all 38 times richer? Spoiler alert, no, not even close. That raw number is hiding something big. And what it's hiding, of course, is inflation. This is why economists are so obsessed with the difference between nominal and real values. Nominal value uses the prices of the day, which can be super misleading. The analogy here is perfect. It's like looking through binoculars, but you don't know how powerful the lenses are. Real GDP, on the other hand, adjusts for inflation. It gives us the true picture of how much more we're actually producing. And when you make that adjustment, wow, the difference is night and day. That crazy 38-fold increase in nominal GDP, once you strip away the effect of rising prices, it becomes a much more realistic, though still very impressive, 5-fold increase in real GDP. So the economy produced about 5 times more actual stuff, not 38 times more. It's a completely different story. So GDP is a really powerful tool for measuring what we produce. But, and this is a big but, it is not a measure of well-being or standard of living. In fact, the guy who invented it was one of the first people to warn us about this. There is so much important stuff in life that this one number just completely misses. Think about it. GDP doesn't care if you have leisure time. It doesn't put a price on clean air or a healthy environment. It tells us nothing about how healthy or educated we are as a population. All the unpaid work done at home, like raising kids or caring for a relative, it doesn't count. And it can tell you the size of the total economic pie, but it says absolutely nothing about how those slices are divided up. It's got some serious blind spots. And you can really see these limitations when you start comparing countries. For instance, if you look at a special measure of GDP that adjusts for the local cost of living, you'll see that in 2020, China's total economy was actually larger than the economy of the United States. So you see that and you might think, wow, okay, so the average person in China must be wealthier than the average American. But is that right? Does having a bigger total economy automatically translate to a higher standard of living for the people who live there? Not even close. To get a much clearer picture, you have to look at GDP per capita. You just take that giant GDP number and divide it by the number of people. And when you do that, the story completely flips on its head. The US GDP per person at over $63,000 is nearly 4 times higher than China's. It's a much more meaningful, though still not perfect, indicator of the average standard of living. So after all of this, what's the final verdict on GDP? It's got its flaws, for sure. Big ones. But that doesn't mean we should just toss it out the window. Far from it. Here's the most important takeaway. GDP is fantastic at what it was designed to do, measure production. It's a great signal for when things are getting materially better or worse in terms of jobs and incomes. But, and this is the key point, a high level of GDP should never, ever be the only goal we're shooting for as a society. Which leaves us with one big, final question to chew on. GDP gives us this one incredibly powerful number that has shaped our modern world. But if we want to see the whole story, if we really want to understand a society's well-being, what other scorecards do we need? What else should we be measuring? That's definitely something to think about.